Support the atheist community of Polk County with a monthly pledge at patreon.com/polkatheists.
Well, hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Freethought in Florida. Freethought in Florida is a production of the atheist community of Polk County. We are a 501c3 nonprofit organization. I'm Sarah Ray, one of the directors of the ACPC. Today is June 25th, 2020. Our guest today is constitutional and civil rights attorney, activist, atheist, author, former Grand Canyon tour guide, and sometimes photographer, Andrew Seidel. As director of strategic response and one of the attorneys for the Freedom from Religion Foundation, Andrew works to ensure that the government obeys the First Amendment and that Jefferson's wall of separation between church and state remains tall and impregnable. We had the pleasure of hearing Andrew speak in Orlando almost exactly 1 year ago, shortly after the release of his book, The Founding Myth: Why Christian Nationalism is Un-American. So we'll be talking a little bit about that today as well, I'm sure. Please welcome the man with the best hair in all of atheism.
I appreciate that.
Even in quarantine. So we put out an ask if folks wanted to, ask some questions. Hey, if you've got questions for Andrew, go ahead and submit them, drop them in the comments. And one, my wife wants to know what shampoo you use. So that's
I don't know. Whatever's
on the shelf.
Yeah, you get it and use it. And I don't know the answer to that. I do put stuff in my hair, and I'm trying to think of what I could tell you what it looked like, but I couldn't tell you what it's called. I have like an awesome hair cutter, stylist, barber, whatever you would call her, here in Madison. She's fantastic, and she just gives me things, and I just use them.
Yeah.
Jamie, she's fantastic. Yeah, it's like the stuff I put in my hair comes in like a little tin that's black and red, and I think it says knockout somewhere on it.
Okay.
And that's about the extent of what I can tell you about my grooming routine.
Oh, that's hilarious. Hey, listen, before we really get started here, I got to be upfront with you. You were my second choice today. I tried to book Andrew Seidel's butt, but you were the best we could get.
Yeah. He's getting very popular.
Super busy that butt. So for the inside joke for those who are not on the inside, somebody started a Twitter account, Andrew Seidel's butt. Do you know who this is?
No, full disclaimer, I don't know who it is. It's not me. I got a text from Andrew Torres, who runs the Opening Arguments podcast, and he was like, "Hey, so the chatter on the OA Facebook page is that your butt is on Twitter," and yeah, it's up there. So yeah, that's a thing now too.
So funny.
Yeah. If my hair ever gets a Twitter page, I'll be looking at you and your wife, I guess, though.
Yeah, I guess I kind of gave that one away.
Mm-hmm.
So we've been sort of looking at this alternate Biff Tannen timeline for what seems like forever now. It's, what is this, April-tober?
Yeah, we are in the worst timeline.
Do you do that thing that I think you probably did it this morning, that thing a lot of us do where you wake up and check your phone and you're just like, shit. Is it going to be bad? Is it going to be bad? What's the worst thing that's going to happen? What's happened overnight?
Yeah, I've become a big fan of the doom scroll. So I usually do that, late into the evening. I think I was up till 1 last night doing that, reading the Washington Post and everything that's rolling in. I had a theory before even COVID came down that under the Trump administration, our perception of time was warped already because there were so many big newsworthy events. And I think that was how a lot of us sort of judged time. You would look back on the last big newsworthy event and it would have been 2 or 3 weeks ago, maybe a month ago, but things were happening 2-3 times a day. And so I think everybody's perception of time was already screwed up. But now under like quarantine where you're not going into the office, everything is just at home. Time has no meaning anymore.
Yeah. Well,
so yeah.
And I think probably for you, like Mondays and Thursdays are maybe a little more
Yes, that's true.
cautious. So we started a little bit early today for those who were waiting, because we were waiting to see what cases were going to come down from the Supreme Court, um, and if it was going to be like the rest of your next couple of days to have to jump in and respond to what that was, but it wasn't. But I think about like last Monday I woke up and I was shocked by the 6-3 ruling in Bostock affirming sexual orientation and gender identity as protected under the Title VII of the 1964 CRA. That was surprising. Thursday, I woke up to the DACA ruling, which is not great, but still kind of surprising given what we know about the makeup of the court. What the hell is happening right now?
I mean, it's really interesting. There are two big caveats on each of those decisions, which I think is well. Let's back up. First, these are victories. They're victories. We should celebrate them. We should savor them. We should enjoy them. They're few and far between right now. Continue to celebrate them. Have celebratory beverages, some libations after work. I mean, the Bostock decision is fantastic. I mean, it's clear, it's well reasoned, it's well written. It used excellent, conscientious language, and the only downside of it is that it is an interpretation of a statute. It's not a constitutional interpretation, so it's not as broad as we would like. And the justices left a big question open about whether or not a claim of religious freedom could preempt the rights that are protected in the decision.
That was a circle I definitely wanted to draw. In the Gorsuch opinion, takes a whole page to sort of get into this religious liberty question and how the 1993 Religious Freedom Restoration Act might interact. They mention RFRA as a super statute, which is kind of alarming terminology. Talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I mean, and that is the language that those of us who have been opposed to RFRA, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, have used to point out that it's unconstitutional. It is a super statute, and what we mean by that is that it cuts across every other federal statute. That's the language of the law. It says this preempts every other law, which is what the Constitution does. So this is effectively an attempt at a constitutional amendment passed by Congress in ways that don't comport with the constitutional amendment requirements listed in the Constitution itself. Okay, so admitting that it's a super statute is, to me, admitting that it has a serious constitutional flaw, this statute. But we also have to be careful. Like, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act is not the only way that you can get a religious freedom claim to violate somebody's rights under Title VII now. There's also the ministerial exception. So this basically says that churches get to hire who they want to preach their gospel, except that ministerial exception, and that makes sense to a certain extent, but that ministerial exception has been broadened so that you can have teachers, for instance, at a religious school also be considered ministers. And we don't know where the bounds of that exception lay right now. And then obviously the biggest one would be the First Amendment to the Constitution. A religious free exercise claim under the First Amendment could also completely undercut the rights laid out in the Bostock decision. And I think part of the reason that we got such a good, clear, concise decision here and a 6-3 decision is that Roberts and Gorsuch, the conservatives who signed on, know where they're going when it comes to that religious freedom question. That's my fear, anyway.
Yeah, that was another question that we had from one of our folks. Knowing we talk about Gorsuch and Roberts, the reading the tea leaves when that eventual case comes up to sort of poke at that and test the religious liberty claim. Like, how do you think that might play out?
Yeah, and let me mention too, there's one more possibility for the religious liberty claim too. 702A of the Civil Rights Act also allows for, it says in a certain way that it doesn't apply to religion. So there's actually 4 different ways it could. Now, I think the trend in the religious liberty arena has been to weaponize religious freedom and religious liberty. That's that's been where they're going. And to me, I think it's pretty clear that that trend is going to continue with these justices. It is warping and torturing the true meaning of religious freedom, which is meant to be a protection for an individual. And this started in earnest at the Supreme Court with Hobby Lobby, and it's not gotten better. I think I'm deeply concerned that it's going to get worse.
Right. Absolutely. So let's get into the book. Let's talk a little bit about Christian nationalism, the founding myth, why Christian nationalism is un-American. I have my copy right here that we picked up. So maybe start with that sort of entry-level just word definitions, right? What is Christian nationalism? What does that look like?
Yeah, that's where we got to start. A Christian nationalism is basically a political theology. It is the idea that the United States was founded as a Christian nation, that we are based on Christian principles. And most importantly, that we've strayed from those principles, that we've gotten away from the godly founding that the framers of our Constitution intended. And Christian nationalists use that language of return to then justify all manner of hurtful and evil public policy. Things like the Muslim ban, the child separation policy at the border, which people should remember was justified by citing the book of Romans, chapter 13, by citing the Bible. I mean, the opposition to LGBTQ equality, the opposition to reproductive rights, Project Blitz. All of this is justified by citing Christian nationalism. This is, and I want to emphasize too, that this is not a scholarly debate about whether or not the United States was founded as a Christian nation. This is a sinister exclusionary movement. The goal is to redefine what it means to be an American, so that to be an American is to be a Christian, and to be a Christian is to be an American. And once they've done that redefinition, they're going to rewrite our laws. And really, at its most basic level, this is a fight for the identity of what it means to be an American. And then they're going to favor those Christian Americans, make them a special favored class. Everybody else is second-class citizens. That's the goal. That's what they're doing. That's also part of the religious freedom fight that we were just talking about that is making its way to the Supreme Court.
Right. And you mentioned Project Blitz. I like to think the folks here at the ACPC have maybe tired of hearing about it, but I keep talking about it. I do an hour-long presentation on a very deep dive into each one of the specific legislation and proclamations and each of those things. There's actually an Andrew Seidel joke in it, so if you haven't seen it, you should probably. I don't know what you're waiting for. Andrew Seidel with Kermit the Frog. That's all I'm going to say.
Very nice. I'm going to have to check it out.
But so, without giving that presentation again here, in their own words, like you said, the goal is to redefine and reframe the narrative about religious liberty, and then use that as a foothold to privilege Christianity and law. And I want to go into the weeds just briefly and talk about, so some of the stuff that they do is provide talking points for each of the items that they're pushing. And it's stuff like quotes from the founders and excerpts of documents from the Mayflower Compact and the Northwest Ordinance, and just to justify that, as you said, this is a Christian nation, always has been, and we got to get back there. So I want to give folks an example of what some of this revisionist argumentation looks like. I want to read from page 30 of the 2018-2019 Report and Analysis on Religious... You're already taking a deep sigh. Report and Analysis on Religious Freedom Measures Impacting Prayer and Faith in America, a.k.a. Project Blitz, a.k.a. Freedom for All, but mostly Christians. This is under Category 2, Resolutions and Proclamations, recognizing the importance of religious history and freedom in a model proclamation called Proclamation Recognizing Christian Heritage Week. And I'll just, I'll read until my blood boils or you scream, whichever happens first. Religious faith was not only important in official American life during the periods of discovery, exploration, colonization, and growth, but has also been acknowledged and incorporated into all three branches of American federal government from their very beginning.
That's not right.
This nation was founded on principles of religious freedom, and our founding fathers sought God, his blessings and guidance as they established these United States of America as a free and independent nation.
I guess that's why they left them out of the Constitution.
Well, now the first act of America's first Congress in 1774 was to ask a minister to open with prayer and to lead Congress in the reading of four chapters of the Bible.
Yeah, let's just pause there for a second. Let's pause there for a second, because that prayer has been cited now by the Supreme Court a couple different times in a 1983 opinion called Marsh versus Chambers to basically say that governments can pray. Justice Alito cited it in his his plurality opinion in the Bladensburg Cross case. That's that 40-foot tall cross in Bladensburg, Maryland that the court upheld last year. And they cite this prayer from 1774 when the United States was not the United States, but were British colonies, were part of the British Empire, had an established church, as evidence that the United States should allow prayer under the U.S. Constitution that was not written for almost another 2 decades. So the logic there is just beyond flawed. And then the minister they're talking about is a guy named Jacob Duché, who was a traitor. He was worse than Benedict Arnold. This guy deliberately, he gave this prayer, and then he turned around and fled to England. He wrote George Washington a letter that said, hey, that Declaration of Independence was hasty and ill-conceived. You need to rescind it right now. The Congress that you serve, bunch of cowards. Continental Army, bunch of cowards.
Wow.
I mean, this is the guy that they are holding up as the pinnacle of American Christianity. And he's a traitor. Okay? And all of this, by the way, is in the book. All of this is in the founding myth. And this is really what I try to do in the founding myth. I want to correct the historical record, but correction isn't enough. Pointing all these facts out is not actually enough. You have to go on the offensive. We have to show that the principles that they are arguing for are fundamentally opposed to the principles on which this nation was built. That there's this irreconcilable differences, fundamental disconnect between Christianity and American founding principles. That is what I am trying to do in the book. So everything in there, you get a lot of new history and really fun stories like this. And you're going to be like, how did I not learn this in school? And how are they holding up a traitor as the pinnacle of American Christianity? But you're also going to get new arguments to help you win these fights online and challenge Christian nationalism wherever you see it. And if, for instance, your city council or county board is stupid enough to try to push one of these proclamations through, you will have all the ammunition you need and plenty more to fight back against it.
So you made it a whole lot further in that 2.5 page of proclamation garbage than I thought you would. So considering all that, and you sort of just touched on it, you do make an argument that our attempts to counter this revisionist history narrative stuff have been largely ineffective. And
absolutely.
And so what are we doing that's so ineffective, and what is a better approach to that sort of gish gallop of God garbage?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, and I think there's 2 things that are happening. Facts are not enough for a lot of people. They really just aren't. And it should be. And we tend to, as skeptics and atheists and agnostics and free thinkers, put more weight on that. I think we do that at our peril a little bit sometimes. So all the facts are in there for that reason. But we also need better arguments. And that really is where we have fallen down. We have said in the past, look, like, hey, guys, that's not what the founding fathers meant when they said that. Here's the actual full quote. That's not what they intended when they did that. This is what that word meant back then. And that kind of thing doesn't resonate. The subtitle of the book is Why Christian Nationalism is Un-American. And I went back and forth quite a bit on using that word because, right, there's this inherent value judgment built into saying that something is un-American. But we are in a fight for our values right now. We are in a fight for what it means to be an American. And if we don't engage on that battlefield, we've already lost. So, I mean, another way to think of that is America will never be a Christian nation because the moment it becomes a Christian nation, it will cease to be America. Now, patriotism has no religion. And I know that's something that a lot of people listening may even recoil from. Even the idea of being a patriot, I think, makes a lot of people uncomfortable. A lot of our listeners, certainly a lot of people in the free thought movement. But we need to reclaim that heritage. So, for instance, let me just take this is I think one of the things that is most crucial. America invented the separation of state and church. That is an American original. That and the fact that our Constitution doesn't mention or invoke a God are about the only two really original and unique things about our Constitution. So these ideas were born in the Enlightenment, but they were first implemented in the American experiment. That is the true American heritage that we need to reclaim and bury their lies. So we need to call them out as fundamentally un-American when they are trying to say that we were founded as a Christian nation, that we were built on Christian principles. We absolutely have to do that. It is meant to be a gut punch because cerebral and intellectual arguments will work a lot of the time, but not all the time and not on everyone. Oftentimes you need an emotional argument to go with it. And that is what this is meant to be.
If you've been in any social media comment section in the last 3 or 4 years, like that I mean, I see these arguments all the time, and I tend to, there was one yesterday that that somebody posted that was a local municipality that was having like a prayer community prayer service, and the graphic that they had created for it had a very distinctly first century Roman torture and death device on it, which is a decidedly Christian iconography.
Yeah.
And everybody in the comments about, how it's not exclusionary and it's, people pray to other gods. That's fine. They can come too. And, this was a Christian nation. I'm like, no.
Yeah. And I should say, too, that these arguments that are included in the book, they've been honed over 8-10 years, a decade of doing this work and fighting with public officials about the legality of things exactly like you're talking about, and writing them a letter and getting something back and them saying, no, we were founded as a Christian nation. We're based on Judeo-Christian principles, like in God we trust. And so all of this is based on literally countless arguments that I have had about these issues and what works, and I've tossed out what doesn't. And I genuinely think that listeners have not read a book like The Founding Myth. I really wanted to go deeper in this book. So I didn't just ask, were we founded as a Christian nation? I asked, did Judeo-Christian principles positively influence the founding of the United States of America? And the answer to that is no, they didn't. Judeo-Christian principles did not, and especially those that are central to Christian nationalism, they're opposed to the principles on which the United States was built. Again, the two systems differ and conflict to such a degree that it is fair to say, albeit bluntly, that Christianity is un-American. And that's what I really try to do. That's the argument that I make, that these are two conflicting systems with irreconcilable differences. So that's the founding myth, and that's why it works in a way that I think the other arguments have not worked in the past.
One of the things that you do in the book that I really enjoy is the compare and contrast between the 10 Commandments and our Bill of Rights, and how wholly incompatible they are.
Yeah, that was actually where the book began.
This was like a law journal article got out of control, right? Is that what
it was just a law review article that got really out of hand really fast. And that was the nugget of the law review article. I was the 10 Commandments versus the 10 Amendments. So I was going to compare the Decalogue to the Bill of Rights. And I mean, you look at I am the Lord your God, you shall have no other gods before me, right? That's the first commandment. Like, that is fundamentally un-American. It would be hard to write a sentence that conflicts more with American values and principles than the first commandment. And so right off the bat, you've got this great argument that these two systems conflict. And it gets worse from there. I mean, my favorite part of the 10 Commandments, favorite being used from the atheist point of view, is don't take the don't take the name of the Lord your God in vain. Right? Everybody knows that part, but everybody forgets the next part. And the reason they forget it is because you don't read it in church. They edit it off the 10 Commandments monuments that they put up everywhere, thereby showing that the morality and influence on the laws isn't really there, because they have to edit it to make it conform to modern morality. Anyway, For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God,
Mm-hmm.
punishing innocent children to the third and fourth generation of those who rebuke me. So you've got God promising to punish innocent children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and great-great-grandchildren for crimes that their parents committed. And those crimes are exercising their First Amendment right to free speech and the free exercise of religion. So tell me that that is not just an absolutely, one, despicable, two, immoral, three, un-American sentence. That, I mean, it is difficult to write something more un-American than that.
Yeah. I just couldn't imagine like living in a world where that was like a law, where that's how we handled justice was to that's just batshit crazy.
It is fundamentally unjust. It goes against all of our just sensibilities. Yeah. There's no way to square that. And this is the thing, I often talk about that commandment online to show this, because it's such a ripe and stark example of the disconnect. And without fail, if you talk about that, Christians will come and defend it to you. And just pause to appreciate, dear Christian, what you are doing right now. You are defending the punishing of innocent children for your God. That is what your religion is making you do right now. Defend punishing innocent children. But I mean, maybe we shouldn't be surprised at that, given that throwing children in cages was justified by citing the Bible as well.
Let's talk about I don't know what to call it. Is it like an Overton window or a shifting zeitgeist? And I think about, you sort of mentioned this too. We kind of get these questions all the time. Why aren't we fighting to get In God We Trust off the money or take Under God out of the pledge? And you make a compelling argument, I'll paraphrase here, that a lot of this change isn't going to happen in the courts, but in demographics.
Yes.
We keep seeing new Pew and PRI studies about how we're just the fastest, we're among the fastest growing cohort in the religion chart. Could this be like a last ditch effort? Is this sort of the last gasps of a religion that's rapidly losing relevance?
Absolutely. They are raging against the dying of their privilege. There is no doubt about that. And as America nears the tipping point at which Christianity's power is reduced to equality, the Christian nation myths are going to be trumpeted with renewed vigor, right? The Christian nationalist is not going to go gently into the obsolescence for which they are bound. They have grown accustomed to religious privilege. They are used to imposing their beliefs on unsuspecting school children. They expect politicians to pay lip service to their deity, and they demand acknowledgments of their God on public property. But that time really is ending. The end of Christian privilege is near. Most importantly, you have to fight. It really is up to you. One of my favorite quotes, James Madison said that outspoken resistance is, quote, the first duty of citizens, right? You are responsible for a big part of fighting this battle. So in the book, The Founding Myth, I give you the facts and I give you better arguments, but you, if you are listening to this, are responsible for the rest. Christian nationalists, again, they've persuaded too many Americans to abandon our heritage, to spurn those secular foundations we were talking about in favor of their myth. And it's time that we really fight back against that more loudly and more vocally. This is not a Christian nation. Our Constitution does not belong to the Christian nationalists. It belongs to we the people. And it's up to us to take it back. Now, to focus down a little bit more on some of those things you were talking about, In God We Trust, One Nation Under God, all of that I address in the book. But when you're talking about fighting that in the courts have settled that issue, right? That fight for now in the courts is done. We can reopen it maybe later, but something else has to shift before then. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that we are talking about a lot and focusing on a lot is creating political power for the secular movement. And all the groups are coming together, all the big national groups, a lot of the local groups, everybody's coming together to work on this. And the numbers are shifting rapidly in our favor. We are quickly becoming a group that not only can't be ignored, but if you ignore us, you're not going to be able to win an election, kind of thing. And the changes are just remarkable. For instance, millennials now outnumber baby boomers as potential eligible voters in this next election. Generation Z, younger than millennials, now are just going to eke out beyond the silent generation in this coming election in terms of eligible voters. But they have to go out and vote.
Yep.
And the numbers of nuns that are voting have been skyrocketing. You're talking about from 2016 to 2018, a couple years before. Well, I'll just send everybody. I wrote an article for Rewire News called something like "Politicians Take Note, Secular Voters Are a Growing Force," something along those lines. Andrew Seidel, Rewire News, Google it. You'll be able to find it. And I got all the stats in there explaining what, and I'm really excited to see what happens in 2020.
I want to go back and touch on a little bit of that idea that we need to mobilize as a political force. I think about, and we talk about this in my Project Blitz presentation, here in the state of Florida. We were first out of the gate with the National Motto Display Act in the wake of the Parkland shooting. One of our representatives pushed through this bill to put "In God We Trust" on our schools, using that tragedy to help propel that to completion. Same person had also filed a couple of years prior to that a bill that is also a Project Blitz bill that basically just sort of mirrors down what's already federally protected. But she promoted it as putting prayer back in school. Mm-hmm. Of course, we're talking about self-described demon buster Kim Daniels, yes.
Yeah.
And then in the last 2 years, she tried to push through the Blitz bill, putting a mandatory class for teaching the Bible, which would be an elective, but that's still problematic. And it failed both times. But elections have consequences, friends, and that's the sort of stuff that, and this is beyond partisanship, but this is the kind of stuff that we need to be paying attention to. We did sort of, before the pandemic put us all out, I started a conversation about, with Justin Scott about, like, what do we do to get involved in politics and bird dog candidates and have these conversations and get them on the record. Where do you stand on religious liberty issues when these things are coming up? Like, what can we expect out of you? And then the COVID came along and just completely changed everything as far as the primaries and this election cycle.
Yeah, but we had Justin on Ask an Atheist, Ffrf's show, to talk about that same kind of stuff. And even though things have changed a lot, there are a lot of representatives are hosting virtual town halls right now. And if we know one thing, it's that atheists rule the internet. Yeah. We ought to be showing up at these town halls and talking about the issues that we care about and asking questions about those issues and pointing out to these political operatives, because they're sitting in front of the computer. Those staffers are sitting in front of the computer reading all these comments, what the demographics look like and how they're shifting, and that you do not pay attention to us at your peril. You pander to Christian nationalists at your peril, because that is going to turn us off immediately. And you talk about Kim Daniels. We've been watching her and fighting her nonsense for a long time. And the schools bill was so frustrating because we had, I think, successfully stopped it. And then the Parkland shooting happened. And the students were begging for a legitimate, useful, substantive response. And they revived this idiotic God displayed in public schools bill instead. And that's what they gave them. Not any type of, and not anything that was gauged to make them safe, just something that was gauged to promote Project Blitz, Christian nationalism, and the idea that we are founded as a Christian nation. Just utterly abhorrent.
And how offensive to these kids.
So offensive.
Living through that, and the ones that didn't. Like, how offensive.
Yeah.
I don't know if when we're talking about that sort of hopeful message for the future, it's those kids, man. The stuff, the activism that we saw coming out of Parkland, and they have just, from Parkland to now Black Lives Matter, we have just seen this this younger generation standing up and saying, hell no, and we're going to be here to, in your face, remind you about this stuff until we make the world better. And if there's a hopeful message for me, man, it's those kids.
I agree completely with that, and I'll say one other thing that is giving me hope lately, and this is harder, and it's not a silver lining per se, but what the last 3 or 4 years have shown us is where our country is deeply, deeply flawed, and we wouldn't have had that if things had been in the best of all possible timelines, as opposed to the worst timeline that we are definitely living in.
Yes.
I mean, we like you would never, I would never have spent as much time thinking about the Electoral College or how the Senate is an undemocratic institution. That's not a phrase I would have ever uttered positively 3 years ago. And I think that this moment in time is forcing a lot of people to reassess everything, and that is just, progress is going to leap forward because all of these fissures and cracks that we have, plastered over lightly, barely, are clear to us all right now, and we know everything that is, or not everything, but we know where many of the errors of our past are. We know how to fix them. Now we have to take back power and do that. And again, that takes mobilizing the secular movement and harnessing political power. So I think there is reason to hope. I mean, obviously, there's been just the Christian nationalists have done a ton of damage.
Mm-hmm.
But I do not think that we are at the point yet where it cannot be repaired. It will take a long time, especially when you're talking about the judiciary and lifetime appointments. But it can be done. We are still at a spot where it can be done. We are not broken.
And meanwhile, I'm seeing a lot of getting our shit together organization around building state level secular caucuses, Freethought caucuses, and that sort of stuff, which is just great. Maybe one last topic here before we let you go. I want to talk a little bit more about the Ffrf and what you do. Because we tend to hear your name whenever you send a letter to a state with a Ten Commandments monument or a school, giant cross on public land, that sort of thing. And obviously when some of the bigger court cases catch the news cycle. But thinking of strategy, how do you decide, as the cases come in, as the complaints are filed from people in the community, right? How do you sort of decide what the strategy looks like on each of those? Whether it's writing letters, which cases do we pursue further, and how, if at all, does that strategy differ when you're talking about different cases, like a local city government Facebook page promoting, a community prayer event or unconstitutional prayer at school, or those sort of different types, different categories of violation?
Sure. I mean, that's a great question. So the Freedom from Religion Foundation, we have 10 attorneys on staff full time. My role as the director of strategic response is more public facing than a lot of the other attorneys. One of the things that strategic response involves is commenting on the issues of the day and getting out there and doing interviews and explaining these complicated legal concepts like the weaponizing religious liberty in ways that the lay people can understand. So I happen to love that role. So I get to do a little more public, but we have the team we have is just phenomenal. And I mean, there are maybe 20 attorneys nationally that do state church separation, including ACLU and Americans United, maybe 25. And 10 of them are at Ffrf. And it is just a top-notch, super talented team of attorneys that I get to work with every day. Very, very lucky. And I happen to love my job. And we get between 3,500 and 5,000 state church complaints every single year. And some of those are duplicates. Some of those are not violations. Some of those are things we can't handle. So for instance, we learned long ago that we won't handle an employment case about somebody getting fired for their atheism because so many other issues go into a case like that the state church angle is really minimal. So we will consult on that case instead. Now, in terms of taking action, those those 4,000, 5,000 complaints, 99.9% of them come from local individuals in the community who are saying, hey, FFRF, this is happening in my city council or at my kid's school. I need help. And we are going to help that person. No matter what, we're going to help that person. Either provide them guidance, which is sometimes all they want about what is legal and what's not, write a letter on their behalf without mentioning their name, by keeping their identity entirely confidential. That's one of the things that we do. Or, if that doesn't work, taking it to a lawsuit. Our first step is always to try to educate. That first and foremost, we see ourselves as an educational nonprofit. We work to educate the public about what the separation of state and church means and what it means to be an atheist or a non-believer in the United States. And that includes public officials. A lot of times, a teacher might be going beyond the bounds and a principal might not know about it, or the principal might know about it, but the superintendent might not know about it. So oftentimes we are able to just correct violations with a simple letter, pointing out what the law says and why what happened oversteps the law. And that's usually where most things end. If they don't, then it becomes a pretty big calculus, a lot of between the person who's complaining. Do you want to take this farther? Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they do. What does the law look like? What does the law say? Is it in a friendly place? Is it in a not friendly place? Can we get a local attorney to help us take it? So then the questions become a whole lot more. We win far more cases than we lose. And again, most of them we're able to deal with just by simply sending a letter. We send usually over 1,000 letters a year on violations. And most of the violations get solved like that.
Right. I also wanted to sort of mention in that conversation too, a lot about organizing at the local level. So obviously we've had some things come up here in Polk County. In fact, we organized as a 501c3 in March of 2019, April. And that's graduation season. And so one of the very first things that we did was had one of the people in our community come to us with a picture of the Gideon Bible that their child had received at the graduation practice.
Yep.
And then sitting through hours of graduation ceremonies on YouTube, watching, several very clearly Christian prayers. And so, in having conversations, I think I've talked to you a few times. I've talked to Jeffrey Blackwell. There's several folks in the in sort of the movement, I guess, when we're talking about legal issues. And I think there's an opportunity for us when we're looking at these things, like if there is a local community, that there's an opportunity there. And if there's not a local, we always say this, if there's not a local group, start one.
Absolutely.
But a lot of times there are. And so it's those local groups, I think, getting involved with those different organizations, right? If we're involved, if we know the city council members, if we know the school board members, if we have a sort of existing relationship with them, if we're working towards that as a goal, then when these other things come up, they know us. And it's a little easier to go in and say, hey, come on, this isn't just and we always hear this too. Oh, there's people from Madison coming in here trying to tell us what we do. No. This is people in your community. And we have a reputation, a good reputation as an organization, and we're going to work together. And that sort of thing, I think, is a benefit that we need to be working on.
No, I'm so glad you brought that up. And first, I'm going to say two things about that. First, I want to say that the atheist community of Polk County does fantastic work on that front, especially on the just tearing down the general unthinking stigma that attaches to the word atheist. I follow you guys on social media. You're always out there cleaning up the roads and just really putting a friendly, nice, neighborly face on atheism, which is, to me, just the absolutely most critical thing you can do. I often do like a lot of crazy right-wing radio shows too. And like one guy, Jesse Lee Peterson.
God.
Yeah, go look him up. He's way, way out there.
Yeah.
And I've been on his show 4 or 5 times. And he's convinced that atheists are miserable, evil, awful people, but he likes me. And he can't figure out why. And you can watch the interviews, and the cognitive dissonance is just, it's too much for him to handle.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is going to do more than any argument that I put forward. So I really appreciate all the great work that ACPC is doing. So that's number one. Number two.
Thank you.
FFRF and the national orgs are far more effective when there are local activists supporting their letters. I mean, I can tell you, we did the math on this a while ago, and I haven't looked at it or redone it since, but I think we decided that we were something like 50% more effective in terms of both timing, so shorter to get a solution, a resolution, and 50% more effective. So getting positive outcomes that much more when we had active local activists, either individuals or groups, supporting the work that we were doing. It makes a huge difference. And I could not agree with you more that if there's not a local group near you, start one.
Yes.
Do it. I mean, really, really, definitely do it.
And if you want advice, if you want help, call me. Like, I'll talk you. Like, so when we started, we had the gift of David Williamson from the Central Florida Freethought community to be like a mentor and say, hey, man, here's how you set up a group. Here's all the things you need to know. Here's the things you need to do. Here's the people you need to call. And I'm going to pay that forward. If there's, if somebody else is out there and wants some advice, let's do it.
Yeah, David is a treasure. And I mean, one other thing too that you can do that we've danced around this issue a little bit, but I want to say it explicitly before we go, is if you are out there listening to this, run for office. run for office. To me, this is like the most important thing people could do. If run for office as an out non-believer, do it. Get out there, change hearts and minds.
There's a slide in the presentation that I do that calls for this. That says, hey, if you have it, consider running for office. And the punchline is look, I'm a trans atheist in Polk County, Florida. Okay, and I've even thought about running for office. But if you're like me and you think, Sarah, I have way too much damning podcast audio out there to do me any good. But if you might be thinking like me, I can't do this. Let me remind you, we elected a giant toddler to the highest office in the land and a demon buster to the Florida House.
No, you're absolutely
you can
right
do
to point
this.
It out. You can. You're absolutely right to point that out. I think the biggest hurdle that people face is, what do I know about running a city or a county? And all you have to do is look at the people who are in office right now and know they don't know anything. If you are listening to this, you are more than capable of running for office and doing a better job probably than 80, 90, 95% of the people that are in office. Don't let that hold you back. Just seriously, take a moment and just look at who's in office and compare them to yourself. Yeah. You are worthy. Go for it.
I do want to mention, since we brought up the Central Florida Freethought community and our friends there, and all the sort of local organizations here in Central Florida, and the Florida Humanist Association, you will be appearing there at 5 p.m. Eastern on Saturday, July the 11th. Virtually, yes.
Virtually, yes.
Appearing. So if people want to look that up, that's on Facebook, and we'll put links to all of that in the notes and all. Hey, this has been a long time coming, and I could just talk to you all day long. I really appreciate it. But let me give you the final word. If there's something we didn't get to, we didn't talk about Espinoza, and I maybe come back and let's do that.
It's going to come down on Monday, so we can talk again next week on that. I'd be happy to.
That'd be great.
Yeah, I mean, I would really encourage everybody, please go pick up a copy of The Founding Myth. It really, I think, is a book that you are going to be surprised and learn a lot from, and hopefully learn a lot to argue with, give you a lot of ammunition. And if you have a copy and you enjoyed it, please go leave a review on Amazon or Goodreads. If you didn't enjoy it, don't leave a review. But even more important than the book is... please join the Freedom from Religion Foundation. We need all the help we can get right now. And it's not just about your membership dues. That's important. It's also about joining your voice to ours. Because when I write a letter to a city councilor that's trying to pass a Project Blitz proclamation, and I can say we represent 300 people in your community, or we represent 3,000 or 30,000, it makes a difference. It really, really does. Oh, and I'll say this too, just since since I am appearing virtually everywhere now, FFRF is offering, we figured out a way to do signed copies of the Founding Myth since I can't do book events. So if you order it through the FFRF store, and then leave a little note during the checkout, there's like a comments section, just say, I'd like a signed copy, and you can put whatever else you want in there within reason. I'll sign it for you, and get it out. And I think it's on sale on the FFRF website right now too. So there's that.
If people want to follow you or your butt, or maybe your hair, by the end of the day, I might have that.
I cannot speak for my hair or my butt, but I am Andrew L. Seidel, Seidel, on all the things, the IG, the Twitter, the Facebook. So
all right.
I'd love to have more people follow.
Awesome. Director of Strategic Response and one of the attorneys for the Freedom from Religion Foundation and author of the book, The Founding Myth, Why Christian Nationalism is Un-American. Andrew Seidel, thank you so much for the gift of time today, and I look forward to chatting with you again, maybe next week when we have an Espinoza ruling.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. It was a genuine pleasure.
Absolutely. Thank you, man. All right, let me wrap the show up here and tell you about some things that are coming up. Freethought in Florida is now available in podcast form, so you can get that now on YouTube and Facebook video, and also now in your favorite app. Find subscribe links at our website. You can also become a patron at patreon.com/polkatheists, which is another great way to support the ongoing work here at the atheist community of Polk County and the production of this show. And we want to give a huge thank you shout out to Julie for becoming our very first patron. Thank you so much, Julie. As always, you can find out about the ACPC or make a donation at polkatheists.org, and follow at polkatheists on all the social media. And of course, everyone remember the 3 most important things: don't touch anything, wash your hands, and wear your mask. Be safe, and we'll see you next week on Freethought in Florida.